Chapter 1. The smallest trade in the loudest port. The docking concourse of Waystation Kestrel was built to make you feel insignificant on purpose. Ceilings arched like the ribs of a dead giant. Holographic billboards spoke in 12 languages at once, and the air was a permanent stew of ozone, fried algae, coolant leaks, and someone's expensive perfume trying to win a war against reality. Jace Morin, human, contract mechanic, and the kind of broke that turns pride into a luxury, had spent the entire shift on his knees inside a cargo tug's belly, replacing a cracked thermal regulator with a salvage part he'd cleaned 3 times just to make it look new enough to pass inspection. His pay came in station credits that evaporated the moment they touched his account. Berth fee, tool lease, oxygen tax, habitat sanitation contribution, and a fine for walking in the wrong lane because an automated sign had glitched. When you lived out on the trade routes, you didn't ask the universe for fairness. You asked it for the decency to be consistent, because inconsistent suffering makes you feel like you're being mocked. He'd saved one thing from the last supply run, 1 square of old Earth chocolate, wrapped in foil like a relic. It wasn't the fancy kind. It was a cheap ration bar segment, slightly bloomed from temperature swings, edges chalky where the fats had separated. But it smelled like cocoa and memory, and Jace had been holding on to it for weeks as if it were a promise. A small sweetness kept for a day when he needed to remember he was still human. He planned to eat it tonight, alone, after he showered the grease off his arms and pretended his room wasn't just a closet with a bed bolted to the wall. That plan died when he saw the girl. She was folded into the shadow beneath a broken advertisement kiosk, where the light flickered enough to make it hard to focus on anyone lingering there in accident that Kestrel's security pretended not to notice. Her body language screamed the universal dialect of hiding, shoulders tucked, chin down, hands wrapped around her own elbows like she was trying to keep her bones from escaping. She wasn't human. She was slender and slightly too tall for the narrow space, skin a pale lavender gray, with faint speckles that shimmered when the kiosk light blinked on, as if her body couldn't decide whether to be seen. A torn cloak covered most of her, but her face was visible. Big eyes, glossy black with a thin ring of reflective silver, watching the passing crowd the way starving people watch a bakery window trying to calculate which direction safety lives in. When her stomach betrayed her with a small, audible growl, she flinched like someone had punched her. Jace slowed. Not because he thought he could fix her situation. Kestrel ate compassion for breakfast and charged it rent, but because he recognized something in the way she moved. The careful economy of someone rationing energy because there isn't enough food to waste on standing up. A security drone floated past, its lens sweeping the shadows. The girl pressed deeper into the corner, breath held, hands trembling. The drone moved on. The concourse kept roaring. Nobody noticed. Nobody wanted to. Jace crouched slowly, keeping his hands visible, speaking softly so he wouldn't trigger her fear reflex. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" It was a stupid question, like asking a vacuum if it enjoyed breathing, but it was the only opening he had that wasn't a threat. The girl's eyes snapped to him. A small translator bead at her throat flickered, trying to catch up, and when she spoke her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping metal. "Food," she whispered. One word. No explanation. No plea. Just the raw need, stripped of pride. Jace's hand went to his pocket before his brain could argue. He felt the foil square of chocolate, warm from his body heat, and something inside him clenched. This was his last sweet thing, the one comfort he'd been hoarding like a lifeline. He had every rational reason to walk away. Chocolate wasn't currency out here. It wouldn't buy him safety. It wouldn't solve her hunger long term. But the girl's eyes didn't look like a scam. They looked like a countdown. He unwrapped the foil slowly so she could see it wasn't a weapon. The scent of cocoa leaked into the air, subtle, but real. The girl's pupils widened, her throat working as she swallowed nothing. Jace broke the square in half with his fingers. The cracks sounded louder than it should have, like the station itself was listening. "Here," he said, and held out the half. The girl stared, frozen, as if generosity was a language she didn't trust. Then, very carefully, she reached out and took the chocolate between 2 fingers, avoiding touching his skin like she feared it would burn. She lifted it to her mouth, hesitated 1 heartbeat longer, and then tasted it. The reaction was immediate and astonishing. Her speckles brightened, tiny points of light flaring across her cheeks, and neck like a constellation waking up. She gasped, not from pleasure alone, but from shock, as if the flavor had triggered something deep and forgotten. Her whole body shuddered. For a terrifying second, Jace thought he'd poisoned her. Then she started to cry, silent tears sliding down her face while she chewed as slowly as someone handling something sacred. "What is this?" she rasped, the translator bead struggling to shape the nuance. Jace blinked. "Chocolate," he said. "Old Earth. Just candy." The girl shook her head, eyes wide, glowing freckles pulsing. "Not candy," she whispered. "Catalyst." Jace felt a chill crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with the concourse's recycled air. Around them, the crowd kept flowing. Nobody cared. Nobody noticed the way the girl's skin was quietly turning into a star map. Not yet. Chapter 2. The Taste That Woke an Empire. The girl, she finally managed to tell him her name was Rel, though the translator bead insisted it was only an approximation, didn't inhale the chocolate like a starving person would normally do. She treated it like a code she was decoding with her tongue. Each tiny bite made her speckles brighten and rearrange, forming faint geometric patterns that crawled across her skin and then faded, as if her body was running diagnostics. Jace watched, half fascinated, half horrified, because he'd never seen food behave like technology, and because the part of him that had survived long enough on the trade routes knew one rule. Anything unusual is expensive, and anything expensive attracts predators. Are you okay?" he asked again, because now it wasn't a stupid question, it was urgent. Rel's breathing steadied. Her eyes focused more sharply, losing some of the fog of starvation. "I am awake," she whispered, like the concept was new. She looked at the remaining half still in Jace's hand, and her throat bobbed. "More," she said, then flinched, as if ashamed of wanting anything. Jace hesitated only a moment before offering it. He told himself it was already done, already spent, no point pretending he could claw it back into his pocket. Rel accepted it with both hands this time. The moment the chocolate touched her lips, her speckles surged brighter, and a soft hum vibrated in the air around them, low enough to feel in the teeth. Jace's comm bracelet crackled with static. The kiosk behind them flickered, its broken advertisement suddenly stabilizing, brightness spiking as if someone had injected power into its dead circuits. Nearby, a row of overhead lights, old, unreliable, snapped into perfect alignment, their flicker smoothing into steady illumination. A security drone that had been hovering sluggishly at the far end of the concourse suddenly reoriented, its lens swiveling toward them like an eye-catching movement. Jace's stomach dropped. "Rel," he hissed, keeping his voice low. "What are you doing?" Rel swallowed the last bite, and the hum in the air sharpened into something like a chord. "I am not doing," she whispered. "I am being done." The sugar dash, she searched for the word, translator bead glitching as it tried to translate biochemistry into station slang. "It fits my lattice. It turns it on." "You're what?" Rel pressed a trembling hand to her chest. The speckles there formed a spiral for a heartbeat, then spread outward. "My species," she said, voice steadier now. "We are Kethri Lumen. We carry a bioelectric lattice. It can speak to machines, but it needs a key compound to initialize. We used to grow it in our oceans. The syndics burned our oceans." Her eyes darkened. "They starved us. They made us dormant so we could not resist." Jace stared. "Syndics." Rel's gaze flicked toward the drone that was slowly drifting closer. "Hunters," she whispered. "Buyers. They sell living interfaces. Living keys. My people were. Doors." Jace's skin prickled. He'd heard rumors of living locksmiths, enslaved species used to bypass vaults and ship security, but rumors were easy to dismiss until they stared at you with glowing skin and hunger still in their cheeks. "So chocolate dash," he began. Rel nodded, eyes shining with a mix of fear and something dangerously close to joy. "Your chocolate contains compounds similar to our ocean fruit," she said. "It wakes the lattice. It gives me voice." The drone was close now, lens whirring. Its speaker clicked on. "Unregistered bioenergy signature detected," it droned. "Submit to scan." Jace's mind raced. If station security flagged Rel, she'd be hauled to holding, processed, and then quietly sold to whoever had the right bribe. Kestrel didn't protect the vulnerable, it protected the highest bidder. He grabbed Rel's wrist. "We're leaving," he said. Rel's hand tightened around his, and the moment her skin touched his comm bracelet went silent, static gone, signal clean. Then, improbably, the drone's lens flickered, tracking lost for half a second as if someone had pulled its eyes out of focus. Rel looked startled. "Contact," she whispered. "You can duct. The lattice can anchor through you." "Great," Jace muttered. Love being used as a battery. But he didn't let go. He pulled her up, and she swayed, still weak, but upright. Together they moved into the stream of pedestrians, trying to look like nothing, just another broke human and another tired alien in a station full of tired aliens. It almost worked. Then the overhead display screens, dozens of them, glitched at once. Their advertisements cut out, replaced by a single symbol, a spiral of light surrounded by a ring, pulsing in rhythm with Rel's speckles. It wasn't station signage. It was a signal, blooming across the concourse like a shouted name. The crowd noticed. Heads turned. People slowed. Some stepped back instinctively, like prey sensing a predator in the herd. Station security alarms didn't sound yet, but the air changed, the subtle shift of a place deciding something interesting was happening. Rel stared at the screens, horrified. "No," she whispered. "It's calling." Jace's throat went dry. "Calling who?" Rel's eyes locked onto his. "My ship," she whispered. "And the hunters. Everyone who listens for the spiral." As if to answer, a new sound rose above the concourse, the heavy, synchronized stomp of armored boots. Jace looked over his shoulder and saw them station enforcers in black plating, moving in a wedge formation, weapons held low but ready. Behind them walked a man in a clean coat with a corporate badge too shiny for a station this grimy. His eyes were fixed on Rel like she was a prize. Jace's hand tightened on hers. He'd traded his last piece of chocolate for a starving girl. And in return, he'd just lit a beacon bright enough to summon an army. Chapter 3. The Human Who Wouldn't Let Go. There's a moment in every bad situation where you realize the rules you've been living by are about to get you killed. Jace had survived Kestrel by keeping his head down, paying fees, ignoring suffering that wasn't technically his problem. That strategy worked right up until a glowing alien girl's hunger turned his candy into a flare, and now keep your head down was just another way to get stepped on. The enforcers spread out, cutting off lanes, their boots loud enough to make the metal decking feel like it was vibrating in fear. The corporate man didn't hurry. He didn't need to. He moved with the calm of someone who had already purchased the ending. "Rel Ketheri Lumen," he called, voice amplified just slightly by an implant. "By claim of salvage and recovery rights, you are required to submit. Your biological interface is property of the consortium under Article Dash." Jace barked a humorless laugh. "Article my ass," he muttered. Rel flinched at her name. "They found me," she whispered. "It's over." "No," Jace said, and surprised himself with how certain it sounded. "It's not." He scanned the concourse fast security choke points, maintenance doors, crowd density. Kestrel was a labyrinth designed for commerce, which meant it had back routes for staff, ducts for ventilation, service hatches for repairs. He knew them because mechanics lived in the station's skeleton. "Can you do more?" "Machine talking?" he asked. Rel's speckles pulsed, dimmer now as the chocolate's effect began to ebb. "I am awake," she whispered, "but weak. Without more catalyst, the lattice fades." "Of course it does," Jace muttered. He patted his pockets out of habit, then remembered. No more chocolate. No more sweetness. He had given away his last lever. But hunger had taught him improvisation. He spotted a vendor cart nearby selling imported Terran sweets to bored tourists, expensive, overpriced, kept behind a clear shield. Jace's chest tightened. He didn't have money. He did, however, have something else, a station maintenance badge that still worked in some systems, and a lifetime of knowing how locks lied. He yanked Rel behind a pillar as an enforcer's gaze swept past. "Stay close," he whispered. "Touch my wrist again. Anchor whatever you can." Rel's fingers wrapped around his forearm, cool and trembling. The moment she touched him, the overhead lights above the enforcers flickered just a hiccup, but enough to make two of them glance up. The corporate man frowned. Jace sprinted across a gap, ducked behind the sweet cart, and slammed his maintenance badge onto the shield's reader. It beeped red denied. Of course. He swore under his breath, popped open a panel beneath the cart with a screwdriver he always kept clipped to his belt, and rewired the reader's bypass line the way he'd rewired 100 temporary fixes in the tug base. Sparks jumped. The reader beeped green, confused. The shield slid open. The vendor shouted, lunging, but Jace didn't stop. He grabbed a handful of wrapped chocolate sticks and shoved them into his pocket. He tossed 2 credit chips basically worthless onto the counter out of reflex, then bolted back toward Rel. Enforcers noticed. Weapons rose. The crowd screamed and scattered, turning the concourse into a storm of bodies. Jace crashed into Rel, dragged her toward a maintenance hatch labeled Authorized Personnel Only, and tore open 1 chocolate stick with his teeth. Eat, he commanded, thrusting it toward her. Rel's eyes widened. She hesitated only a fraction of a second before biting. The effect was instant again. Her speckles flared bright, the spiral symbol pulsing across her skin like it had been waiting to wake. The air hummed. Nearby screens glitched. The enforcer's helmet comms crackled. Rel grabbed Jace's hand hard, not weak anymore, and whispered something in her own language, wet, musical syllables that sounded like a command given to the station itself. The maintenance hatch clicked. Unlocked. Jace stared. You did that. Rel's eyes flashed with fierce focus. Door, she whispered. I am door. They dove inside just as stun fire sizzled past, scorching the wall. The hatch slammed shut behind them. In the maintenance corridor, the air was hotter, heavy with engine heat. Pipes ran along the walls like metal veins. Jace ran, pulling Rel along, boots pounding. Behind them, enforcers slammed into the hatch, cursing, trying override codes. Can you lock it? Jace panted. Rel pressed her palm to the door panel. Her speckles surged. The hatch's status light flipped from green to red, and the override keypad went dead, as if the station itself had decided to stop listening. The corridor ahead branched into a service tunnel network. Jace knew well-tight spaces, crawl routes, bypass ladders. He led them downward toward the refinery spine, where noise would cover them and security coverage was patchier, because corporations didn't like recording what happened near their dirty machinery. As they ran, Rel's breath hitched. The chocolate, she whispered, voice amazed even through fear. It is. Kindness. And weapon. Jace barked a strained laugh. Yeah, he said. Human specialty. We turn snacks into revolutions. But the corporate man wasn't stupid. His voice crackled through station speakers, overriding normal announcements with a tone of amused authority. Lock down service corridors, he ordered. Seal all maintenance tunnels in sectors 7 through 12. I want my property intact. Jace froze for half a heartbeat. They can do that. Rel's eyes widened, and her glow flickered as the station's systems responded. Bulkheads ahead slid shut with heavy metallic groans, cutting off routes like a closing fist. They're trapping us, Jace whispered. Rel swallowed, fear flickering. Then her speckles brightened again, and her gaze hardened. Then, she whispered, we trapped them back. Chapter 4. The shock that made the station remember. Jace had expected courage to feel like heat in the chest or some cinematic clarity. Instead, it felt like calculating angles while your hands shook. Bulkheads slammed closed in the tunnels, sealing paths that had always been open to him. The station's voice, a synthetic announcer, repeated lockdown warnings in calm tones that made panic feel like a policy. Behind them, enforcers advanced through alternate corridors, their boots a distant thunder. And in the middle of it, Rel stood with her palm pressed to a control node, freckles blazing, face strained with effort, looking less like a starving runaway and more like a living circuit trying to outthink an entire infrastructure. Your lattice can override locks, Jace said, keeping his voice steady for her sake. Can it override cameras? Rel's jaw tightened. Yes, she whispered. If I have enough catalyst. Jace glanced at the chocolate sticks in his pocket. Ridiculous, really, that a human comfort food was now their fuel source. He ripped another open, handed it to her, and she bit down without hesitation. The moment she swallowed, the tunnel lights dimmed and then steadied, as if the station's power grid had just been rerouted through her heartbeat. Rel's eyes rolled back briefly. Then she exhaled, and her freckles formed the spiral symbol, bright, unmistakable. Listen, she whispered. The station has old layers. Forgotten codes. My people built parts of these systems long ago, before the consortium took everything and renamed it. They left our signatures in the architecture. I can speak to them. Jace stared, heart hammering. You mean, You can control the station. Rel's mouth twisted. Not control, she whispered. Remind. She moved, dragging Jace toward a junction where 3 major conduits met. A place engineers called a nerve knot. A thick maintenance console sat there, its interface dusty, rarely used because most techs didn't have clearance. Rel pressed both hands to it. Her glow surged, brighter than before, and the console's dead screen flickered to life with symbols that weren't in any station language Jace recognized. They were older. Kavya. Like a song written as code. On the other side of the bulkhead, the corporate man's voice echoed again, closer now, satisfied. You can't run forever, he said. You're only delaying. Return the interface, and the human may keep his limbs. Jace felt cold rage crawl up his spine. Tell him, he hissed to Rel. Tell him to go to hell. Rel didn't answer. She closed her eyes, and the station around them changed. It wasn't dramatic at first. It was subtle. Lights in the corridor behind the enforcers began blinking in a sequence, not random, but patterned. Doors they tried to open hesitated. Their comms filled with soft, harmonic interference like distant singing through water. Then the screens in the security hub, dozens of feeds glitched simultaneously, replacing camera views with the spiral symbol pulsing like a heartbeat. Across the entire concourse, people stopped and stared. Vendors, dock workers, passengers. Even those who didn't understand what they were seeing felt the same instinctive shiver, the sense that something ancient had just sat up and opened its eyes. Rel's voice, amplified through the station's intercom system without her touching a mic, flowed out in a language that sounded like waves hitting metal. The translator bead tried and failed to render it cleanly, but the meaning came through anyway, not as words but as pressure in the air, as if the station itself was speaking. We are not your property. We are not your locks. We remember. The corporate man froze mid-stride in a corridor above, his confidence cracking. What is this? He snapped, suddenly sounding human scared. Jace's comm bracelet, which had been dead for weeks because he couldn't afford signal fees, lit up with an open channel. A voice spoke calm, clipped, official in a way Kestrel rarely was. This is Patrol Vessel Sunward Oath of the Independent Trade Accord, it said. Waystation Kestrel. We are receiving unauthorized broadcast signatures and unlawful asset claim transmissions. Identify yourselves. Jace's eyes widened. Patrol, he whispered. Out here. Rel's face was pale with strain, but her eyes blazed. I called, she whispered. Not with words. With the old signature. My people built emergency beacons into stations like this, hidden under corporate paint. The spiral is a distress code older than the consortium's laws. The corporate man recovered quickly, turning fury into performance. This is a private station matter, he barked into his comm, forcing authority back into his voice. We are handling a stolen biointerface dash. Negative, the patrol voice replied, colder now. We have your claim packets. We have your attempted purchase orders. We have footage of armed enforcement pursuing a juvenile. Stand down. Jace's breath caught. The station had betrayed the consortium. Not because it had suddenly grown a conscience, but because Rel had reminded it of a deeper rule. The first purpose of infrastructure is survival, not profit. The old distress signature had triggered automatic external reporting layers the corporation had forgotten existed because they'd never needed them until now. Security drones in the tunnels paused, their directives conflicting, corporate lockdown orders versus emergency compliance protocols. One by one, their lights shifted from aggressive red to neutral amber. Bulkheads that had sealed began reopening slowly, not at the corporation's command, but at the station's oldest emergency logic. Enforcers lowered weapons, confused. Some looked around like they'd just realized they were on the wrong side of a story that was about to be recorded. The corporate man's face hardened into panic. He turned and tried to flee toward a private shuttle dock, but the station's doors ahead of him locked. Rel, still at the console, whispered one more phrase, and the lock indicators flashed with the spiral symbol. Jace stared at her, shock blooming in his chest. You trapped him. Rel swayed, nearly collapsing. Jace caught her, holding her up as her glow dimmed from blazing beacon to a soft, exhausted shimmer. Chocolate, she whispered weakly, almost laughing through tears. You gave me a key. Jace held her close, staring at the corridor where station security now escorted the corporate man away under patrol oversight. His clean coat suddenly looking like a costume someone had torn the authority out of. Around them, the tunnels hummed with a new kind of quiet, the quiet after a system remembers it can say no. Later, when the patrol officers finally reached them, real uniforms, real authority that didn't smell like bribery, their lead investigator crouched in front of Rel and asked gently, "Name?" Rel lifted her head, exhausted but steady. "Rel," she said. Then she glanced at Jace, and something softened in her eyes. "And he is Jace who gives sweetness." Jace snorted, wiping grease and sweat off his face. "That's not my official title," he muttered. The investigator looked at the empty chocolate wrappers scattered on the floor, then at the glowing speckles still faintly tracing Rel's cheeks. "So," she said slowly, "you triggered a dormant emergency beacon layer in an entire station. With candy." Jace shrugged, still half in disbelief himself. "It was my last piece," he said. "Figured it should go to someone who needed it more." The investigator's expression shifted shock, then something like respect. "On record," she said, voice softening, "that might be the strangest and bravest maintenance decision I've ever seen." Rel leaned her head against Jace's shoulder, eyes closing. "It was not strange," she whispered. "It was human." And in the hours that followed, as Kestrel's concourse filled with rumors and the consortium's agents were quietly removed, the story spread across the trade lanes the way good stories always do. Not as propaganda, not as legend, but as a simple proof that shocked people because it should not have worked and yet did. A hungry alien girl tasted human chocolate, woke an ancient signature in her blood, and reminded a station it had once been built to protect the living. And a broke human mechanic, who had nothing left but a small sweetness he'd been saving for himself, discovered that sometimes the smallest gift is exactly the one that cracks an empire's mask.